If you're someone that needs pregnenolone and you take the right dose of it and your bloods look good and you're using the right protocol, but it's making you fatigued and constantly exhausted and tired, that doesn't mean that the pregnenolone's a problem. It means it's unmasked the issue, which a lot of the time is a lack of thyroid hormone. All right, everyone, welcome back to another one of my solo podcasts here in my red version of the Batcave. I just recorded a video on DHEA and it just doesn't feel complete without doing a video on pregnenolone in the same sitting. And the reason for that is that they kind of have similarities, but I think in most cases, for the sake of understanding, when we're looking at this from a TRT approach in men, it's best to look at them as kind of two halves of a whole, kind of like yin and yang, in the sense that, yeah, they have similarities, but then they also have opposing mechanisms that together actually make them complete. But they also don't necessarily need to be used together, and some people just need one or the other, some need both. But they have a lot of similarities in their structure. The fact that they're both part of the same hormone cascade, that's probably a similarity. But they also have a lot of similarities in how they are administered and utilized and tested and followed up. So pregnenolone or pregnenolone is I've heard it be called the grandfather hormone. I've heard it be called the grandmother hormone. I don't think it needs a gender. But what I really want to talk about today is similar to the DHEA video, because I've made so many videos about pregnenolone. But I need to keep making them because, one, apparently people only watch new stuff in the algorithm now, so people might have missed the fact that there's like 6 years of pregnenolone videos I've made. But I'm not saying the same stuff about them every time I make them. And I think it's important to share, what's changed, what's still the same, what's got less emphasis, more emphasis, how are the nuances of this evolving, because if we're talking about hormone optimization, that's what the patient does, but providers also need to optimize the way that they're prescribing and delivering the hormones. And I think some prescribers just want to give the laziest, easiest approach possible. The issue with that is that the patient often expects the outcome from the best protocol. And from what I've seen, there's just not that much more work involved in doing it right. But there's a huge amount to gain outcomes-wise from optimizing the treatment protocol. And it's not rocket science. It just means you just need to understand how these hormones work. So pregnenolone is the start of the steroidogenic, which is the sex hormone cascade. So everything comes from pregnenolone. That's why it's called the grandfather or the grandmother hormone. But that also doesn't make sense because it would have to be some kind of hermaphrodite ancestor hormone to be able to serve that function itself. So, or maybe it could be an asexual hormone that reproduces. I don't know, but if people can come up with a better term, please put it in the comments. But what it's doing is it's allowing your body to make everything from progesterone down to cortisol, when we put this in a graph, but then also DHEA down to testosterone, estrogen, and all of its metabolites. So everything comes from cholesterol, which is metabolized into pregnenolone via a vitamin A dependent process. And then everything comes from here. And just like with DHEA, for a long time, it was thought of just to serve that role. It was just the thing that the hormones were before they were hormones. But research showed that a lot of its therapeutic effect came from the hormones it metabolized into, but not all of them. Some of the therapeutic effects actually came from the pregnenolone and the sulfated version, pregnenolone sulfate, itself. And this was considered a pretty remarkable development at the time. And what's interesting is when you look at the mechanisms and the roles of pregnenolone, you actually see that a deficiency in this, area could not only have wide-reaching consequences in terms of the body doesn't have the raw materials that it needs to make the stuff that it must have in order to thrive and survive, but also that the role of pregnenolone is really important itself. So if the body doesn't have an abundance of it, if it's just running on like the fumes and the bare minimum of what it can just to get by, it's going to be missing a lot of really important processes, which are integral for a lot of the body's kind of thermostat roles, not just with temperature regulation, but keeping everything in what's called homeostasis, which is balance. kind of keeping things even keel and preventing them from fluctuating too high or too low, kind of regulating things. But it's also very neuroprotective, and it's very important for detoxification pathways. Interestingly, it switches on the receptor that clears out microplastics. Isn't that interesting? It's called the Pregnenolone X receptor. So Pregnenolone has some very interesting interactions with the endocannabinoid system, the CB1 and CB2 receptors, as what's called a allosteric modulator. So what it actually does is it doesn't just prevent your brain from becoming too excited from, THC intoxication and regulating those processes, but it actually protects and regulates your brain from being overstimulated negatively via a variety of means. So it prevents a lot of the side effects that people get from, healthy intake of things like caffeine, for example. Pregnenolone, interestingly, will also, when it's deficient, cause people to develop a stutter. It's not the only thing that will cause a stutter, but if people have a head injury and then all of a sudden they're stuttering afterwards, definitely something to look at. So when we're looking at treating people with pregnenolone, one of the things it has in common with DHEA, if you watched the last video or listened to the last podcast, is that if you give someone DHEA who doesn't need it, it causes problems. Maybe more harm than good. Maybe it causes some benefits with some side effects. Maybe it's neutral. Depends on how lucky you get. Pregnenolone's pretty similar in that regard. If there's a reason that it's funny that I stutter when I'm talking about pregnenolone causing stuttering. It's an inevitable thing. Anyway, when you look at pregnenolone, if it was universally beneficial, then everyone would take it. So the thing that we always have to come back to is being like, okay, well, why doesn't everyone just take it? Okay, because it doesn't work for everyone. Some people just don't benefit from it at all. Okay, so why do some people benefit and some people don't? Well, there's two factors. One is that some people need it, and the other factor is that some people aren't getting it delivered properly. Because just like with DHEA, even if you are deficient in pregnenolone, if you take a bad protocol of it, you won't get the same benefits as if you took a good one. The thing that's annoying is that it's not that difficult to get the protocol right. When practitioners are actually testing for the blood deficiency, they're evaluating the symptoms, and they're doing the hard part of it. But then when it comes to treating it, they're just giving their patients a crappy product because they're not intrinsically understanding the mechanism of pregnenolone when you give it to someone. So pregnenolone produces important effects. Pregnenolone sulfate produces important effects. A little bit metabolizes to DHEA, produces important effects. DHEA is made locally in the cell, produces important effects. The problem is a preferential and overconversion to progesterone. Now, progesterone is not a problem. It is not a bad guy. But if you give a woman too much testosterone, what happens? She might feel great. She might love it, but she also might grow a mustache. She might not like that. Progesterone is incredibly protective for men. It has all the amazing anti-stress benefits that women get, but it's also feminizing if you have too much of it. And that's where we see pregnenolone cause problems, is that if you don't need it and you take it, your body just converts a ton of it to progesterone. Or if you already have robust progesterone levels to begin with, that conversion may lead to a supraphysiological level of progesterone and lead to undesired feminizing effects, especially if your goal of testosterone therapy is to improve the outcomes of masculinization, which at the end of the day, that is what people are trying to do. So taking something that moves things in the opposite direction of that is probably not going to be aligned with the goal of hormone therapy. If you've just started TRT, it is completely normal to feel overwhelmed and confused. There's a lot of new territory to cover, and there is a lot of conflicting information. I wrote TRT 101 so that you can have everything that you need to know in an instruction manual in one place that you can refer back to, that you can have all the questions answered before they even come up. TRT 101 is my best practice approach for TRT from start to finish, and it contains everything that you need to avoid all the challenges and pitfalls that I've seen come up in my clients over the last 5 years. You can check it out via the link below. So this is why pregnenolone needs to be treated with a lot of respect, and it needs to be taken very cautiously, is that pregnenolone is profoundly beneficial when it's used properly and it's actually deficient. The effects of restoring a pregnenolone deficiency, I have had multiple people over the years crying on the phone because it has changed their life. And practitioners have told me the same thing, especially with veterans with PTSD or ex-athletes with head injuries. when you correct the pregnenolone deficiency, it fixes so much stuff going on inside their head that they just feel at peace again. And if you don't do that and they have undetectable deficient pregnenolone levels, nothing's going to make them feel better. And I wouldn't be surprised if there is a very high self-deletion rate of people who have undiagnosed pregnenolone issues. A lot of the time it can show up as schizophrenia or bipolar, either 1 or 2 actually. And this is because it is so heavily involved in the regulation of the excitatory and inhibitory neurotransmission. So it's about keeping your brain firing the way that your brain's supposed to fire for you to feel okay occupying the thoughts of your mind. It's also very protective. It's also, as I said, very important for the detoxification pathways. And it creates a profound reduction in perceived stress. With deficient pregnenolone levels, it's virtually impossible to have healthy sleep architecture. And I believe that, and again, credit to Georgi Dinkov in the low toxin forums for pulling this study out, is that I believe pregnenolone was actually shown to be an effective sleep aid in doses as low as 1 milligram. And this is because the pharmacokinetic effect of creating a small but still significant spike in this hormone, lo and behold, due to the GABA A receptor agonism, or not agonism, positive allosteric modulator effect, which basically replicates the same mechanism of action as a benzodiazepine, it makes you feel relaxed and makes you feel sleepy. So how do we give it to people, and how do we get a good outcome from giving it to people? So in the States, you can check pregnenolone sulfate. So you check a blood test. It's so easy in the States because you can just measure for it. In most countries, though, you can't measure it, which makes it way harder. So if you can measure it, and we're looking at, what is the unit for pregnenolone? I believe it's micrograms per deciliter. There's only one unit. It goes into the hundreds. I believe it's micrograms per deciliter. It might be micrograms per liter. But when it comes to pregnenolone, you're shooting for somewhere, ideally, above 100. But what limits pregnenolone testing from being very reliable is that the number fluctuates a lot. What I will tell you is a very accurate indicator of someone needing pregnenolone is 2 tests that show undetectable levels. One test is highly likely that they will need pregnenolone because it is unlikely that even with the fluctuations of pregnenolone, and this is just what I've seen from doing this for many years, it is unlikely that the fluctuations of pregnenolone, if levels are healthy, will dip down low into undetectable territory, which is typically under 10. 2 undetectable tests is a slam dunk that someone needs pregnenolone. If pregnenolone is below 50, they may need it, but they may not. So if they're not symptomatic, if they're feeling good, if everything's great, then no problem. But if they're feeling like they are constantly on edge, they're unable to sleep, their mind is constantly stressed and anxious, and they're having issues with also their digestion and constipation or irritable bowel issues, it is very important to look at considering a trial of pregnenolone, especially if there is a viable root cause for it becoming deficient, such as age, head injury, PTSD. They're the big ones you're mainly looking at. So the physiological dose of pregnenolone, according to my research, is about 50 milligrams a day, give or take, maybe less. But we also have to look at bioavailability, and we have to look at, when they're looking at these research studies, does 50 milligrams bring someone to an optimal level of pregnenolone over 24 hours, or is that just what required to reach an optimal level in the blood acutely? And again, we're using micronized sustained released products to get an optimal effect. The way that I've been practicing with pregnenolone now for almost 7 years and recommending that either other health coaches or working with doctors and nurse practitioners all over the world to do this is to use progesterone as the end marker. Because if we're measuring pregnenolone at peak or at trough, we're looking at different levels. We're looking at a fluctuating natural production with a static exogenous production. So one's variable, one's consistent. What level of pregnenolone is optimal according to who? They stopped practicing with pregnenolone way before they worked out how beneficial it was. There are no studies that indicate what an optimal level of pregnenolone looks like. Whatever lifeextension.com or whoever has another video on it, where did they get that number from? They either got it anecdotally, which if it's from practice, great, or they just made it up. Now, what I would say is that whatever that anecdotal number is would probably align with what I'm about to say. The difference with how I do it is that you can do this all over the world, and that's using progesterone as an end marker. So Most of the time in men, if you take progesterone above about a 1 to 1.5 nanogram per mil, which is about a 3.5 to 5 nanomole per liter, you're going to start to run into feminizing side effects. And this tends to be the cap of what most men can tolerate. Some will tolerate a little bit more, maybe 50% more than that, but any more than that typically causes problems. I like splitting pregnenolone sustained release twice a day. I like keeping individual doses of sustained release at 50 milligrams or less. So most of the guys who I work with who need pregnenolone are taking 25 to 50 milligrams micronized sustained release twice per day. So 50 to 100 milligrams total. Other guys are only taking 10 milligrams twice a day because any more than that causes too much progesterone conversion issues. Now, if someone also needs DHEA, it's important to put them in together because of this balancing effect that you can have. And if you are someone, and this is the last point that I'll leave this with because this is a very important point, if you're someone that needs pregnenolone and you take the right dose of it and your bloods look good and you're using the right protocol, but it's making you fatigued and constantly exhausted and tired, that doesn't mean that the pregnenolone is a problem. It means it's unmasked the issue, which a lot of the time is a lack of thyroid hormone. So if you are deficient in thyroid, which is the main driver of your energy metabolism, then your body is going to be compensating by upregulating stress hormone activity. So if you then block the stress hormone activity with one of the most potent cortisol agonists being pregnenolone, all of a sudden you've got no stress to run on, but you've got no thyroid either. And then this will make you tired and lethargic. So if you need pregnenolone, but it makes you fatigued, look at your thyroid. And if you look at your thyroid and go, all my lab numbers are within range, that's when you want to contact a clinic that knows what they're doing, that's going to actually look at, is it optimal? Do you have, detectable antibodies for Hashimoto's? Do we need to do an ultrasound to make sure that your thyroid's working properly? Or has your testosterone protocol been properly optimized? That's another thing that's important. So I will leave you all with that one to have a think about, and hopefully that provided some insight or value and something to look at. I've got a full 90-minute plus Pregnenolone masterclass that you can check out if you want to do a deep dive on it. Otherwise, I will see you all on the next one. Okay, everyone. Hope you're all well. Welcome to the Pregnenolone Masterclass 2.0. This is a updated and revised version of the Pregnenolone Masterclass that I recorded about 2 years ago. Most of what I said 2 years ago, I will stand by, but there are a few updates and changes that I'd like to make.